Hi, we're back. Eric Cohen, co-producer and co-host of the very show you're watching right now, the CineFiles. Before we get into our topic of discussion, let me do our usual round of introductions. To my left is Mr. Andre Joseph, and to his left is Mr. Jeffrey Galashaw. Say hello, gents. Come on, a little more energy.
Greetings.
Let's go. Hey, all right. So today's topic is going to be a bit of a freewheeling discussion here. We're going to talk about, well, simply put, bias. As in, are there films that you've already made a decision to not want to like, let alone not want to watch because of a certain personality involved with that film, be it an actor, topic, or director, or even screenwriter? And has that bias, negative or positive or otherwise, possibly affected the potential success of that film once it's released? Is this a complicated thing? Are there circumstances where we should say, hold on, calm down, let's not harsh on this film, we don't know anything about it yet, or is there a legitimate argument for that? Or are there circumstances where it's absolutely okay to already have a preconceived notion of what you're going to see or what's going to come out based on just the teaser or the bad buzz surrounding the production of that film?
Well, I think it comes to a personal decision at times. I don't think you should necessarily badmouth the film. You can explain your problems with maybe why. Like a recent thread on our board on Facebook is a Ghostbusters remake. Everybody's saying why it's going to. In other words, they're all complaining about it, but nobody's getting to the point other than they keep saying, "Oh, it's a remake. That's why I'm bad mouthing it."
Can we just clarify? Not to apologize for interrupting you, but we're talking about Paul Feig's reboot.
Yeah, reboot of Ghostbusters
with an all-female cast.
Yes, and I mean, some have said, "Oh, because it seems gimmicky, because it's for women." Some have said, "Oh, it just looks horrible," but it's like you haven't seen anything. All you've heard is casting so far. You haven't read a script. You haven't heard a premise. All you know is it's a reboot. And I admit, yes, we are overcrowded with reboots, but my thing is, give it a chance, or at least, if you're going to complain about it, give a specific reason, because sometimes, I understand, a lot of us grew up with Ghostbusters, so we don't want to see it remade. Okay, that's a legitimate excuse, but others are complaining about the casting, then it gets personal into the casting, like Melissa McCarthy's not funny, or, oh, she's fat, I don't know what that has to do with anything about the movie, but okay. And sometimes
I was most amused by people it's a very recent thread actually, where people are like, oh, why the hell is Melissa McCarthy in this? And it's like, well, she was attached to this she was like the only female name that was attached to this from when they announced this.
Exactly. The three others are more the new names that we've heard. And I mean, also, I'm not trying to say anybody who is against this is necessarily sexist, but it does come off on the board sometimes that might be the reason, because it's all females. I'm not saying that's definitely why, but no, it's like the elephant in the room that no one's talking about. I can understand if you think it's a gimmick and just use to sell tickets, like, how can we do this different for women? Well, then say it if that's what you really feel, but don't try to just say, oh, I just don't like Melissa McCarthy, and that's why I'm going to prejudge this film. Because my thing is, yes, we've had a lot of shitty remakes, and I'm not going to lie, I have been somebody who has sometimes made up their mind before a film came out that everybody else was excited for. But essentially, I try to sit there and say, okay, but I'm going to read the reviews, give it a chance. And if it does have a positive, or if somebody I know whose opinion I trust says something about the film like, oh, I thought it was good and I think you'd like it, then I will give the film a chance, because I was dead set against seeing Prometheus when I even first heard about it. And even though I'm a fan of, the Alien series, but as the trailers kept showing, I kept thinking, wow, this really actually looks very impressive. And then we all know the debacle that happened after that film was released. But my thing was, at least I went from totally against it to at least giving it a chance.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Ghostbusters as an example, because we're talking about there are many different issues why people have a problem with that film.
Okay.
Maybe all those issues are the reason that people have a problem with the idea of that film coming into existence. But let's break it down. You brought up the possible chauvinism.
Yes.
That's an all-female cast.
Yes.
You brought up possibly that people have certain dislike for certain personalities involved in that film. You know, I'm sick of Melissa McCarthy. Blah 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 blah. Then you brought up I don't know what you call it, prejudice against fat people, whatever, right? And then
weightism?
and probably the key thing I would say is, because you brought up the term remake or reboot, is that, there is this exhaustion with regard to this propensity to remake, reboot everything.
Especially like beloved films.
To the extent where people are getting upset when they announced recently they're going to make, Fincher's going to do Strangers on a Train, right? People are like, oh, how the hell could you remake that? That's a classic, that's Hitchcock. And it's like, well, actually, it's another adaptation. Patricia Highsmith wrote Strangers on a Train. Patricia Highsmith also wrote the Ripley novels. And you know what was shot twice? Ripley's Game. You know what else was shot twice? Talented Mr. Ripley. Are those remakes of the other? If you see The American Friend and you compare that to Ripley's Game, which starred John Malkovich, they're two entirely different movies.
Yes.
Completely different. If you see Purple Noon, which was the first adaptation of Talented Mr. Ripley, and then you see the Talented Mr. Ripley starring
Totally different.
right, Matt Damon, two entirely different films. Personally, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this. I like Ghostbusters. I don't think it's a classic.
Okay.
I think it's a film that I really, really enjoyed the first time I saw it. Every time I revisit it, I find it holds up for me less and less. I don't think it's as funny as I remember it being.
Okay.
I think in some ways it's kind of lazy in how it approaches its subject, although it has some very imaginative stuff going on in there as well. And I realized the project was originally conceived with John Belushi in mind and Bill Murray, and it became a Bill Murray part. Right? I hardly think that the part we see Bill Murray play was how it was originally conceived for John Belushi. But I don't think it's so sacred that you can't do something different with it or something new with it.
I agree.
But, however, I will acknowledge that there are certain things that when they get announced, I'll be like, oh, hell no. No, you can't do that. Don't touch that. And you just made this like 5 years ago. Why are you remaking this again? All that stuff. Well, Ghostbusters was made in the 80s. We're more than 2 decades away from it.
30 years.
Right? Which is fine because look at all the times Hollywood had remade films, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and they're remaking films that were made like 5 years prior to when they remade them. Again, going back to Maltese Falcon, granted, you can make the argument that it's just another adaptation of the same source, but that film was made within almost 5 years of each other. There was an initial version in the 30s, and there was another version in the 30s, and then you had 1940-41 with John Huston's legendary version, right? But they're all made within a decade, the same decade almost. But I want to pose a question to Andre.
Yes.
Could the reverse be true? Where the thing that I've noticed is that, okay, we come from a cinema snob culture, all of us. The CineFiles has been an ongoing internet film discussion show for a while. And we've always sort of erred on the snob side of things. We've always talked about, oh, I refuse to see this because that person's directing it. Oh, that film looks like crap. Who'd want to see this, right, or that, et cetera, et cetera. And we're just a microcosm of a lot of point of views out there. And there seemed to be for a while, in the past year, I've noticed in forums, stuff like that, a backlash against that, where a lot of people are coming out saying, why are you bad-mouthing this before you know anything about it? Do you think it's possible that you can be too positive?
I think so, because look at what happened in 1999 when Episode 1 came out for Star Wars. The huge hype over this movie. I know for me as a kid, loving Star Wars, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to go out and buy toys. George Lucas is going to be directing. This is going to be fantastic. This is going to be like the old days again. And this thing was starting to get a little bit overboard. And you saw the lines around the block, and I'm starting to wonder, it could backlash, but no, it's still Star Wars. This has got to be great. And then it came out, and I waited till after the first day because I knew it was going to be a crazy madhouse. And I wasn't blown away, I was hyped up ever since I saw the trailer. I thought this was looking great, the effects, and I see the movie and it's like, what's wrong here? With the effects being so, flat compared to the miniatures and the sets that were built in the original films, and the acting was just so wooden and cardboard cutout, and that just dampened my expectations for the next 2 movies. So I think that kind of set a standard after that with anything else that came out, whether it was Spider-Man or X-Men. anytime you saw the pictures and it was different.
Well, now, well, you bring up a good
Yeah.
point. I just want to address this so that I don't forget it.
Yeah.
But the whole fanboy thing, what we call fanboys, which is a very sort of overly simplified way to label to put on people. But there has been a strong sort of voice that's come out on anything that's film related, that's based solely on the opinion of the quote unquote fanboy. And you could go source that all the way back to the advent of the internet and websites like Ain't It Cool News and stuff like that gave a voice to this kind of voice. The risk of sounding redundant, but yeah, I think Star Wars was basically that's when the switch flipped.
Very much.
Where people after that was like, you better not burn me after that point, and this way I'm going to remain skeptical until you can prove me otherwise. And I don't want to like accuse anybody and oversimplify or overgeneralize anyone's opinion, but it seems to me that there are people who are ready to ballyhoo something. There's a latent ulterior motive where maybe it's an issue. It could be an issue of, oh, I like what I see, I want to be a fan of this, and if someone has a contradictory opinion, they don't like it. So their response is to go into overdrive and the opposite and really push and say, oh, you should really not judge this before it comes out, to the point of, oh, doesn't this look awesome? Why don't you think this looks awesome? It's just a teaser. It doesn't tell you anything other than how it looks and who the characters may be, and that's it. Because those same people doing that, I guarantee there was a film announced, a director attacked at one point in their life to say, I refuse to see this because of that alone, not knowing anything about the film going in. You know?
Well, I can't say I've been excited to that extreme where I was just forcefully promoting, but I remember when 21 Jump Street, the movie, came out. As soon as I saw the trailer, I was its biggest, fan. I was telling people, you got to see this. Even though I hadn't seen it yet, but I was like, oh, I'm going opening day. It's going to be the best. And luckily for me, it actually was, for me at least, very entertaining, and I really liked it. And, I guess initially I got so much people questioning me of why I felt that way before the film came out, but then after the film came out, so many people were also right. I was surprised at how good it was, or I'm surprised at how much I liked it.
Now, I will say that, for the record, I am afflicted by bias. I am not interested whenever a new Michael Bay film is announced. I couldn't care less. I'm not a Michael Bay fan.
There.
I think he's a skillful director, obviously.
Yes, talent.
I just think there's no soul to his work at all. They're commercials.
Yeah.
Even his attempt to try something a little different beyond what he does, like Pain and Gain.
Mm-hmm.
I was with it for a while. In fact, I was like good 2/3 of the film. I was like, this is actually pretty good.
Yes.
I'm all for this. And then it's just another Michael Bay film. After watching that film, I am convinced that Michael Bay is not capable of doing anything beyond shallow. However, there are people out there that there's this whole thing. There are now Michael Bay fans coming out of the woodwork. Have you noticed this? Where they're staunchly defending Michael Bay. And
Why the hate?
Yeah, why the hate and all that
And
stuff.
there's actually a book devoted to an evaluation of all his films. Which I read. Or also another director who is also, I guess, ballyhooed, but also seems to always turn a profit. You have the Tyler Perrys. A certain audience, as soon as they hear a new film, it's like, oh, let me guess, Madea doing this, Madea doing that. But, it has all this backlash against it, but it's still, number one at the box office.
Do you think there's, a lot of people like to bring up the fanboy thing. It's brought up in our thread recently. And I feel like the fanboy thing doesn't really have the power that you used to have.
No.
I
Because it seemed like studios for a while there were listening to the fanboys, and if there was any bad mouthing or anything, they seemed to want to change it, let's say mid-production, to more suit them. But they seem to fail to realize one thing. They might badmouth it, but either way, they'll still pay to go see it, no matter what. Even if just to complain.
Agreed. And more to that point, everyone that's complaining about a film before it comes out, right? This is the big punchline to the whole thing. Let's say Ghostbusters. Everyone complain about Ghostbusters. Let's say Fantastic Four. People who think, oh, the teaser doesn't do anything. In fact, the teaser makes me not want to see this more. Mm-hmm. What if these films come out and they get rave reviews?
Oh, then they'll give it a chance, or they'll...
Rare is there the person who still sticks to their guns and refuses to see that film. There's only one person I know that does that, Michael Foltz.
Of course.
You know, who can't be with us here today. God bless you, Michael. And your obsession with Boris Yeltsin. Long story. But the point I was going to make is that Rare is the person who, like, against all reason, still refuses to see something, even if the entire world is telling you, are you fucking crazy? This film is awesome.
You know, I try to look at this from a certain perspective as far as everybody knows, if you've read my blogs, I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan. I grew up with it. It's a big staple of my childhood. And it's no secret that I'm against a reboot and this female cast, even though I do think, you know, Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy are hugely talented and they're funny, as Paul Feig is a director. That being said, though, now let's just say, okay, I put that difference aside and say, okay, you know, the original is what it is. It's 30 years ago. Let me accept this for what this is. I still don't trust the studio that also remade RoboCop, remade Total Recall, and couldn't put an original twist to it. They just got, you know, some okay directors that they were able to puppet into making just a standard by the numbers remake that really had no impact on the culture. Right. And a good example would be something like Total Recall, which when they announced the remake, I was like, okay, you know, that was a Schwarzenegger movie, and it was a Schwarzenegger movie. Maybe this might be more closer to the Philip K. Dick novel.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was willing to give it a bit of vows. It's an opportunity to do another adaptation for your memory. Will give you wholesale. They could go back to what Cronenberg intended to do, you know, like Richard Dreyfuss in the late part, right? But it turned out to be a remake of Total Recall. Right.
We gotta have the Sharon Stone character. We have to have the chick with the 3 titties. We gotta have, you know, he finds out that he was this guy that was trying to sabotage everything. And it offered nothing new. And, you know, you look back at remakes in the 80s, like with Scarface and The Thing, they were done by talented guys who found an original twist to those stories. Carpenter with The Thing going back to the source material.
Exactly. And this is the thing people forget and I guess part of it is, and I don't blame people for having an aversion to this, because the remakes we get today do feel like cash-ins. They do feel like that. Yeah. There was a period when people remade films, they attempted to make good movies, right? Now you got to understand something. Brian De Palma's Scarface, remaking that should be tantamount to someone wanting to say remake Raiders of the Lost Ark today.
Right.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because the original Scarface, the Howard Hawks classic, is a classic. It's an absolute classic. It's also a benchmark in crime melodrama and violence depicted on a screen. Paul Mooney, who plays the lead character, this is the guy that they pulled out of Yiddish theater to play this character, and it's one of the first method acting performances. He completely immersed himself and transformed himself to play that role. This is an actor who was not the same in any film he ever made. You would not recognize him from film to film to film. So you got to understand that the original Scarface is considered one of the greatest films. It's a classic, and how dare Brian De Palma remake that classic? Well, the reason why you weren't bothered by it was because it was Brian De Palma. It was Al Pacino. You know, at the time, remakes weren't considered. You know, even when they remade King Kong, right? You know, De Laurentiis, people look forward to it to see what they would do in a modern context. Thing is a fantastic example. You know, there was a period where remakes, there was an attempt to actually make a good movie, and a director would put their own personal stamp on it. Now, when they remake films, it's all about, recognize this title, recognize these moments in the original film. We're going to be, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudging at that, you know, because it's sort of the same thing, but it's not. But it's sort of the same thing, it's not, because we know you're coming to see this film because you love the original. That's why we're doing this, but we're going to repeat these things from the original, you know, which defeats the whole purpose of a remake. Sure. And Hitchcock wasn't above a remake. You know, Man Who Knew Too Much, he did it twice. So, anyway, I'm not sure what point I made with that.
I mean, it's like, you know, at this point, I just don't know how much of the fanboy hate or just any hate on a film these days has anything to do with box office. Because I go to theater as a filmmaker, and I just see the general public being kids in high school or just adults just having a good time on a Friday night.
Right.
And they don't go like we do, seeing, the backstories of who they hire to direct and all the politics going on behind the scenes. They just go out, they see it's good marketing.
We forget that the average moviegoer tends to be kids.
Right.
And I don't think it's changed that much, but when I was a kid, I go to movies with friends and stuff like that. You hardly ever paid attention to the movie, especially if you're double dating, kind of thing. Well, I mean, like I had experience, like middle, when I was like, visit my grandparents in Michigan, go out with my cousin, we double date. The girls were dating would like get up and leave all the time, go to the bathroom, do their own thing. People were like fucking around, having fun and shit like that. That is a culture outside of East Coast, culture outside of West Coast. And you have that element. You have people that just go see a movie because
they just want to be entertained.
They want to be entertained. You have people that go see a movie because this is their date night. They got away from the kids. They go when they get to the cinema. That's there and then. That's when they decide to see a film. And then there's everyone else. There's the people going to see a film because they're really attached to the source material. That could be either the next Marvel thing, or it could be 50 Shades of Grey, or Harry Potter. And then you have like the people who are like us, who are considered like liberal, intellectuals, film snobs or whatever, that live on either coast. And it's interesting, and it does vary from like territory. I brought up an example recently in a thread that's like, the example I brought up was like Troma Films, right? Having been an East Coast part of the film production scene of the East Coast, Troma's like the Kevin Bacon of the East Coast production scene. You don't know, it was hard to work within the East Coast production scene without knowing somebody, or knowing somebody who knows somebody who worked with Troma at some point, worked for or worked with. I interviewed for Troma. Our own Mike Foltz worked for Troma. Everybody's worked through Troma. And I didn't know a single person who not only did not like Troma Films, but didn't like Troma as an organization. Didn't like Lloyd Kaufman. Everyone had a famous revolving door where people just said, you just work there for a few months and then leave. All that stuff. So to my surprise, you have this whole Midwest contingent of film critics and stuff like that, have their own podcast, who adore Troma and adore Lloyd Kaufman and all that stuff, which is fine. I just think it's interesting that, okay, there's these, dare I say, alternate universes where a film or personality or whatever that a community of people that I'm a part of, peers, dislike, is absolutely loved by a community of peers somewhere else. And we talk about the generational gap on Goonies. It's like I come from a generation of people that thought Goonies was just obnoxious, and then there's a generation of people who think it's the best thing ever, like it resonated with them in their youth and all that stuff. And I just think it's interesting how that comes into play with all this.
Okay.
Yeah, or even like you look at recently with the recent Transformers movie, how there was so much fanboy hate. Like, don't go see this movie. There were like petitions telling people, don't go to the theater to see this film.
But were they like insisting people see the first two? I don't understand that.
Right. And where did it make most of its money? In the international market, where they don't give a shit about all that.
Of course not.
Yeah. I have to say that the example you brought up, Star Wars Phantom Menace, is a really good example how I went into that completely psyched and expecting like a return to greatness, whatever that was, a return to my, the joys of my youth of enjoying the initial Star Wars films. And to the point where I think Mike Foltz said it best in our Star Wars show, that even when after the film ended, we wanted to believe it was a good film, because we were so hyped up for it going in, and it took a while for it to dawn on us, no, this wasn't a good movie. It really wasn't.
Well, I have a similar thing like that, but to a smaller degree with the film Insomnia, the remake, directed by Christopher Nolan, starring Robin Williams, Al Pacino, Hilary Swank. You have this great cast. I had been blown away by Memento when I first saw it in theaters, so I was really excited because this was like his first studio film, and he has this great cast, and I'm just so excited. I watched the film. I like it, but then on subsequent viewings, like when it came on DVD, I actually sat there and watched it and realized I really don't like this film, and I don't really think it's that good. And unfortunately, that kind of affected my feelings towards Christopher Nolan films, like The Prestige. I was skeptical going in, and I really didn't think it was as amazing as everyone else did. And really, I didn't really become a fan of his again till I would say The Dark Knight. That's when I was really, like, again, blown away. I'm not going to say as much as I was by Memento, since that was more of an original story, but I finally saw him being skilled again. with that film.
Well, you brought up an example. I think it's a good example of where you go in with too positive an attitude. Do you think that there's a contingent of people that sort of worship at the altar that is Chris Nolan, that he can do no wrong a little bit?
I think
I find that happens in discussions a lot. Where I don't, just for the record, I have issues with how Christopher Walken approaches filmmaking. Full transparency.
Christopher Nolan.
Oh, Nolan, sorry.
I was gonna say, Christopher Walken? What is wrong with Christopher Walken?
Yes.
Any movie.
Exactly.
My next film will deal with dreams within
Brainstorm.
dreams, indeed. Christopher Nolan. I think he's a phenomenally talented filmmaker, director. I would like to see what he does with someone else's script.
I agree with you. Because,
But having said that, I do think there are people that are a little too...
Yeah, well, I was going to bring up like how, I guess after, I think it was Inception came out, on the boards, a lot of people were already comparing him to Kubrick. And it's like, he hasn't made that many films for you to even judge.
Right. Well, it's not even that. It's like every time someone comes up with a what-if scenario, who do you think should make the next James Bond film? Chris Nolan. Who do you think should make the next Indiana Jones film? Chris Nolan. Who do you think should make the next movie about Martin Luther King? Chris Nolan. It's like, really? Everything? Is it really that versatile? Let me get this straight. You're going to do a James Bond film. It's going to be ponderous with a lot of expository dialogue and a lot of solemn photography with okay action sequences. There's a darker aspect of that, like what happened with American Sniper, where if you criticize a film, you're going to have people accusing you of being unpatriotic and all this stuff who haven't even seen the movie yet. And the flip to that coin is all the people that are accusing people who did like the film of being jingoistic, pro-gun, uneducated, ignorant about foreign policy and all that stuff. It's interesting how you can have a certain title that comes along, like American Sniper, that really, really fuels those feelings. And my response is, okay, what if you're a foreign film critic that has no investment in anything involving America? What if he doesn't like the film? Or what if he likes the film? Then what's your response to that? Where does your argument go then? You can't accuse them of being unpatriotic. Maybe you could accuse them of being anti-American, but they're French, or they're German, or they're British. Okay, but what if they like the film? Then where does your argument go? I refuse to see this film because it seems to be pro-gun, it seems to be pro-military, it seems to be pro-American foreign policy that I'm against, whatever. It could be for political reasons. But then that same person can be like, oh, I really want to see this film, even though it could be a war film or whatever. But it turns out that the ulterior motive is that they really, really like Tom Hanks because Tom Hanks is in it.
Yeah, sort of like maybe certain people don't normally go to see war films, but went to go see Fury because Brad Pitt's in it.
Yeah, something like that. It could be that. It's just interesting how long and short, folks, we're all hypocrites. I'm guilty of this. I'm painfully aware. Anytime. I'll question somebody's rush to judgment on something before I type something out. I was like, you know what? I've done this.
It's a complicated issue.
It's a very complicated issue. Do you think that after this conversation, we're going to be a little more sensitive to other opinions? Are we going to rush to voice our opinion on something? Or
nothing really surprises me anymore in Hollywood. I mean, just any film now that gets talked about that they're going to reboot this, they're going to remake that. It's like I kind of accept it for what it is now, and I'm just going to do my own thing. Maybe try to make some change from the ground up. May not happen overnight, but I'm going to do my best to just support something, whether it's my own film or somebody else's. I'm going to try to support something that's a little different, and hopefully maybe 10, 20 years down the road we'll have a different business. But for now, it is what it is, and you can't really do much about that.
Thank you, guys. I have to my left Mr. Andre Joseph, co-host of the CineFiles, also President Supreme of AJ Epics Productions. What's your blog again? What's the address?
ajepyx.blogspot.com.
Jeff Galashaw, Unfinished Business, host and producer, also co-host of the CineFiles. You've already seen our Twitter addresses underneath our lower thirds. Check us out on Facebook as well. We're also on Google+. Check out our new podcast, which you can download from iTunes now, and rate and comment on us, please. And that's basically it. I'm Eric Cohen, signing out. Yeah. Please don't prejudge us before you see this episode. I'm going to call the home office. Same at that script with the remake of Argo Stat.